In this simulation, we are making links and emojis. What we're going to be creating is a productions possibility curve and that will illustrate increasing opportunity costs. These are the learning objectives that go along with this simulation. I don't have them showing up on the board when the students walk in. Rather, I want them to learn about this through the simulation. So they walk in and the desks are set up in pods of 4. If it doesn't work out perfectly with 4 students per group, I'll have some groups that'll have 5. And I let them know that this is going to be a competition. And so choose your teams wisely. And so they'll sit down, and then what I will do is I will again say that we're making these links and emojis and that we're using our factors of production. And so this is where they'll learn about the different factors of production. For land, I say that the desks are the land and that they're in their natural state and that you can't move them around. Labor, they're the workers, so they're the laborers. For the capital, we've got some different things. We have the paper that they will be using, and this paper is designed to make the links and emojis, and it's got lines on it. They'll also be using, each group will have 1 pair of scissors, and they will have 1 roll of tape. I don't like to put this tape on a tape dispenser because I want them to have to like be able to pull it off and use it that way, because that takes a little bit of extra work and effort. And then the entrepreneur. So they are all their own links factory. And so they need to come up with their company name or their team name. And I have them put it up on the board and I have them space it out. So that way then they can draw the productions possibility curve when we're done with the different rounds. So once that is done, I then go through the rules and how this is going to work. I explained to them that when they're using the paper, you have to cut on the lines. You can't do anything to the paper until you have cut on all of the lines. So in making a link is not a link unless it's linked to another link. And the links, I will be quality control each round, and I'll go around and I will look and see that they're the right size and width. And when you're making a link, you're cutting it down, and then you just take it and you fold it, and then you get a piece of tape and you tape that on there, and then they'll take another one and then they'll link it through. And again, a link is not a link unless it's linked to another link. So here I've got 2 links. You can't have a bunch of sets of 2. They all have to be linked together in 1 strand. And so when looking at it, you could have one that ends up looking like this. What's kind of fun about this is then I will hang these up in the room. I'll hang them from like the ceiling or along the walls, and then their students can kind of remember the simulation and the things that we did. To make the emoji. So for the emoji, you're using the squares here. And what I tell them is for the emojis, I want them to be as circular and large as possible. And so they've got the square, and this can be kind of fun because as they're going through and again, it's a competition, so they're trying to go fast. They're not always that circular and they're not always that large. And so that's where quality control will go through to make sure that the links and emojis look the way that I want them to. And so then they just add the eyes and the smile, and now we have our emoji. So when I've gone through the instructions and I try to reiterate that you can only cut on the lines before you can do anything else, because that comes into play in rounds 2 and 3 for that one. I explained to them that I want them to make 6 links and 6 emojis. And so I will say go, and then they'll have time, they'll be working on it. And when the first group is done, then they will say stop. And then everybody has to stop and put their hands up, and then I'll walk around quality control and I'll tell them exactly how many links and how many emojis I'm counting. After they've done that, each person has a piece of graphing paper, and this graphing paper has the links and emojis on it, and I'll have them plot what they produced. So let's say that they produced 4 of the emojis and 5 of the links. They would put a dot right there when they're doing it. So then I'll have them get rid of all the paper and any tape that they had on the side of the desk. And then they'll take a new sheet of paper. And for the second round, I'll say that they're gonna be, let's say they finish that first round in like a minute and 50 seconds. So we'll use that time. That in this a minute and 50 seconds, they're gonna have to make 12 links. And so what to notice here is the paper is designed to make 6 links and 6 emojis. And so in order for them to be able to make links out of these, they have to cut on all of the lines, and then they have to cut in half the square and then tape it together. And then that will give the length and the width. I don't tell them that. That's something for them to figure out. And they work together in order to problem solve to come up with that. So I'll say go, and then they'll be making the links. And once a minute and 50 seconds expires, I'll say stop. And then that's where I'll walk around and look. I usually end up doing this one in 2 rounds because students have a really hard time figuring out what to do with the squares. Usually what'll happen is one group will figure it out, and then the other groups will kind of see it, and then they'll understand. So I'll usually do that second round of a minute 50 or whatever it is twice. And then I will have them plot that on their paper. So let's say that they made 10 links in that minute and 50 seconds. So they pretty much know what we're going to do for the third round. And for the third round, this is where they're going to be making emojis. And for this one, you have to take the links and you have to cut them down, and then you have to tape the 2 together, and then that will create 2 rectangles here, which then you can manipulate. So this one definitely takes a little more work. And again, they can struggle sometimes conceptually of like figuring this one out. So after a minute and 50 seconds, I'll tell them to stop, and then we'll plot again where they finished. So let's say, and this is where quality control really does come into play. But let's say that they had 6 emojis and no links. So now they've got 3 different points here, and I'll ask them to connect it to draw their PPC. And so that's where you're taking it and you're going through here. And then you can kind of see that this is where they're at. So then what I'll ask them to do is I'll ask them to plot it on the board. And the winner is actually the one that looks the most like an increasing opportunity cost. A lot of times they'll ask for just a final round just to do the 6 links and 6 emojis to see who finishes the fastest. But this is what I'm using for that part. So once they have completed that, we'll talk a little bit about why it was harder to make just links and just emojis. And that's where they'll come up with they'll realize that the paper was designed for 6 links and 6 emojis. And so it took more time in order to cut up the squares and then tape them together to make a link. And then this one took even more time because you had all the cutting to do, and it took extra tape, and then you have to make the emoji face. And so it takes longer in order to do that. So then what I have them do is I have them flip this paper over, and now I'm going to introduce constant opportunity costs. And I'll also talk about how to calculate opportunity costs. I think it's a little harder with the increasing one because it's like halves that you're doing for changes, as opposed to we can do whole numbers for this one. So what I'll do is I will put up on the board and I'll write down this productions possibilities table. And I'll trying to choose here for constant opportunity costs 2 products that utilize the same resources. So an example I like to use are pizza and calzones. Like a 6-inch pizza, the difference between that and a calzone would be just flipping the pizza over in half in order to make the calzone. There's room up here at the top of this paper, and so this is where they can write out the productions possibility table. And I will give them the numbers to use. And so I will say here that if they are making 0 calzones, they have 12 pizzas. And if they now are producing 1 calzone, they can make 10 pizzas. and 2 calzones would be 8, and 6, and 4, 2. And if they specialize in calzones, they will not have any pizzas. Then I will talk about how to calculate opportunity cost. With each additional calzone, when you go from making no calzones to 1, you are losing out on 2 pizzas. When you go from 1 calzone to 2, you're losing out on 2 pizzas. And the change is always going to be the same. It's always going to be 2. And so this represents constant opportunity costs. With each additional calzone, you are giving up 2 pizzas. And then you can go back to graphing it, so that way you can show now what it looks like. So if I put down here and I have my calzones and I have the pizza. For the calzones, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this is where you can talk about graphing and how things need to be in equal increments. But along the pizza axis, I'm going to do it in increments of 2. So they don't have to be the same, but they have to be in the same increments along that particular axis. And then when you're graphing, when you have 0 calzones, it's 12 pizzas. And going through, it looks like that. And so then you connect it. And now you can see that this is a constant opportunity cost. For each additional calzone, I'm always giving up 2 of the pizzas. And then I'll go back here and now I'll talk about that change with the opportunity cost with the increasing opportunity costs. When you went from 0 to 1 emojis, you were giving up a little less than one of the links. When I went from 1 to 2, I'm giving up 1 link for that. 2 to 3, I'm giving up more than 1 link, and that gets larger and larger as you go. So with each additional emoji, I am continually giving up more and more of the links. So that's what we're looking at with the increasing opportunity costs. So why? Why is it that this has increasing opportunity costs and the calzones and pizza had a constant? And that's where you can talk about how the resources aren't easily transferable, that it took more work to be able to make designated squares for emojis turn into links, and the same true for specializing just in the emojis. Whereas when you talk about the constant opportunity cost, the resources that go into making the pizza are really the same as what goes into making the calzone. You just have to flip the pizza over in order to make that calzone. And so that's where they can get into about resources and the transferability when making things. So then you can also use this graph to be able to talk about different points in relation to the PPC. The points that would be along the PPC are the maximum amount that you can produce with the set resources. And they show efficiency. If you had a point D and that was inside the curve, that would be an inefficient use of resources. You have the ability to make all of this, but you're not. If you had a point outside of the curve, that would be unattainable with the resources that you have. You can also talk about in relation to like A and C, if what is it that the economy wants or what that society wants? Do they want to produce 2 calzones and 8 pizzas, or do they want to produce 4 calzones and 4 pizzas? And this is where you can say, this doesn't tell us about what society wants. This tells us about the possibilities that are available with the resources that we have.